Well, welcome everybody back to the Growing Money with Sean Trace podcast. I've got a really interesting guest. Now, can you tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
My name is David Houston. I am a financial coach. I'm a Ramsey Preferred coach, which I'm an association with the Ramsey Solutions Group, Dave Ramsey. I'm a Financial Peace University coordinator. I've taught foundations in personal finance at the high school level. Public speaker, also pretty much anything and everything in the financial coaching world. I'm in it, and I've been doing it for about the last 2 years. Spent the previous 40 years to that in the retail automobile business. I was a car dealer.
That's awesome. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that when I read your bio, I was like really drawn to, and something that you just said right there is that you teach to young people, and this podcast came about because I grew up without financial information, and now I'm in the process. I have an 8-year-old daughter who started asking me questions about money, and I was like, I don't know. And I was like, not sure where to look and where to go for information. And I started doing research and learning about personal finance. But while I was doing that, I said, well, you know what? I want to share with other people, because I feel like sometimes, and this is where I see my role in the whole podcast world, is I'm the one who's willing to ask the stupid questions, because a lot of people aren't willing to,
Sure.
Love your take on that.
Well, as I just said, there's no such thing as stupid questions. I finished a session yesterday where I coached 2 college juniors. They're 2 girls, and they're juniors in college, and their parents reached out to me about a year ago and said, we failed our children. We need help. And it was in the area of personal finance, and they felt like they didn't get it, and these girls wanted to know things about how to manage things once they got out of college. And so we've been working together for the last 9 months. We meet once a month and talk about anything and everything having to do with personal finance. And they're soaking it up and really feel like they'll have an edge when they get out of college.
That's awesome.
My passion for that grew out of teaching my daughter's class when she was a senior in high school about 12 years ago at her small private school here in Texas, and sort of got a passion for teaching at that point in time. So that's when I sort of hooked into the Foundations in Personal Finance curriculum and teaching in general, and just absolutely love it.
It's great. I've been a teacher for the past 20 years. I've had my own business, but I've also taught. Living overseas, teaching English was something that was always able to do as a side hustle. And I love teaching. I love it because there's something about being able to take a concept and make it fun. Like tonight, we were talking about, I was trying to get my daughter to understand compounding interest. I got this great book. I got to plug this book real quick. Give me 30 seconds to find it here. I'm pulling out all the books in front of me. I've got this great book, and no one's paying me to plug this, but I love it. And it's something I'm teaching my daughter, how to turn $100 into $1 million. And it is got all of these little lessons in it for how to grow money. And we started talking about compounding interest today. And my daughter, I could just see, she's like, Mommy, this is interesting. And suddenly she just disappeared. I was like, okay, let's take this concept and make it simple. Imagine, and I teach my daughter these concepts through, we like zombie movies, and it's silly, but we're like, in the end, of the zombie apocalypse, and what are you going to do? And I was talking to her, okay, so you got chicken eggs. You get 2 chicken eggs, and you're really hungry, but you decide, you know what? I'm going to hold on, and I'm going to save one of those chicken eggs. You got to eat something, and you save that chicken egg, and it hatches. And then suddenly that chicken, not getting into all the finding a rooster somewhere, but we're going to say suddenly you start having that chicken lays more eggs. Okay. Now you can eat all those eggs, and suddenly you're still with 1 chicken, and you got to go back to work and make some more eggs. Or you can take one of those and cook that egg and feel better, and then save those eggs. And then suddenly, a couple month goes by, you've got 4 chickens. And then the same thing happens. And I said, so what do you start noticing? We started looking at this and charting it out. Really quickly, you were getting a lot of chickens. And she's like, well, as my chickens start growing, the amount that I can eat. I can have 2 eggs, then I can have 3 eggs, you know? So it starts getting, but she's still saving all of these chickens. And suddenly, and I was like, well, what can you do now? She's like, well, you know, I've got a lot of chickens. I've got like a whole farm. I said, exactly. And then you can put that money out and start having it do work for you. You can let other farmers, you know, use your eggs and start selling chickens and different things like that. And she was just like, oh my goodness. So you mean if we don't spend all of our money? I said, exactly. Like if you put that money into savings and you let it start working, it's like those chickens having their own eggs. It grows. And she's like, Daddy, I love this. Can we start a savings account? And I was like, right there. That right there was it. You know, you just had to reframe it. But like even with me, when I was going through business school, and they were talking about compounding interest, I was like, you know, I was just having a hard time grasping it. But I was like, talk to me about chickens and eggs. I get that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's a great analogy and great something that is if you can put it in language that whatever age you're dealing with can understand it, then you're off to the races.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the concepts that you really love to teach these young people? What are some of the things that you think are really needed? Some of the concepts, the money foundational concepts that they really need?
Well, I'll tell you for one thing, and it's based on what has happened in my personal life, but I think grasping the concept of how debt works, or how it doesn't work, is critically important because I taught a class of seniors last year. There were 16 seniors in the class. And when I talked about debt and I talked about student loan debt to a class of seniors that are going to college the next year and they've already signed up for their student loans, you could kind of see the wheels turning. And, at the start of the class, they looked at me sideways with squinty eyes, kind of like, you can't be for real because nobody says stuff like this.
Yeah.
And then by the end of the class, 8 months later, it's, I don't want to go into. I want to pay this student loan debt off as fast as I can, and I don't want to go into debt. I want to pay cash for my car. I just don't. It sounds like debt is misery, and I was like, yay, because it was for me.
Yeah.
So that's an essential concept. Budgeting is certainly something that not many people are introduced to, and find out too late that they need to do it, and sort of have to clean up the mess that it's made by not doing it. Just anything and everything. They're sponges, but they're also skeptical. Today's day and age with social media and information that's available to them, they come in skeptical, and you have to win them over with common sense, with examples that resonate with them, and talk in a language that they understand, and ask them questions so that you can get their perspective, and then shape things teaching-wise in a way that will help them understand it a little better, like you did with your daughter.
And we are like in a very much a changing atmosphere. There was a statistic I read today that I believe 80 universities are shuttering their doors a year right now. Like American universities are going under at a rapid pace. And there's a couple reasons, but not Ivy League, not the upper echelon of universities, because what they're finding is that people are starting to rethink whether a college degree is worth it versus a trade degree versus, some type, or starting out their own business, becoming an entrepreneur, something that you don't necessarily need a degree for. And without getting into that debate, I think a lot of it is this generation is starting to ask questions of because some of their parents are still saddled with student loan debt, going, are you sure that you want to do that? Because I'm still paying mine off, And I think that a lot of people are starting to rethink that. And and I think that there was a great interview I saw with a financial expert, and he's like, I got student loan debt, and it was really painful for me. I paid it off, and he's like, but if I had to do it again, I would, because for him, it was really important to get the degree that he wanted to. But he's like, but yet I would have done it in a more informed way, not taking out max, probably having a part-time job while I'm going through school to make sure that those extra expenses were covered, and he was just doing tuition, not everything else. And so I think that it's an informed way of doing it. But like you say, this generation that's coming up, Gen Z and now Gen Alpha, which is my daughter's generation, have a super access to information, but it's not always good. Like one of the things too that we were talking about what it meant to be a millionaire.
Mhm.
And so my daughter and I were sitting down talking about this, and I was like, what do you think it means to be a millionaire? And she's like, well, what I see on YouTube, these guys fly first class. They buy all these expensive cars. They, can afford these flashy watches. They go and do all these wild things. This guy, he's giving away $10,000 to everyone. And I said, these people are going to be broke in a couple years because they are not living like a millionaire. And then we have a family friend who is a multimillionaire, a family member that is, one of my daughter knows this person. And I say, hey, you know that person? And she's like, yeah, what about them? They live in a simple house and drive a pretty normal car. I said, yeah, right. You know them, right? And I said, that's probably the richest person I know. They have about $50 million in the bank. And she's like, no way. I said, yeah, they're super rich. Well, how are they rich? Because they know how to save. They know how to put that away. They know how to make their money work for them. She's like, well, they didn't have any of these like airplanes and blingy things at their house. I said, no, they didn't. She's like, well, the house was really nice. And I said, but it wasn't always. They saved for that. They worked for that. It took time. And this young generation, they get Instagram, TikTok, YouTube shows them the millionaire, which is actually not a reality.
It's pervasive, and it's going to get even more pervasive,
Right.
because information proliferates at a pretty substantial rate in today's day and age, and these kids are hooked in, and they're hooked in by virtue of the people that are hooking them in, the companies that are creating connections and sort of hacking their brains and getting inside their thinking patterns.
Yeah.
So that there's a connection already that they trust just because it's sort of something that they grew up with. And to break those concepts and to break those perceptions and to break those preconceived notions that they have that have just been planted inside their brains is a yeoman's task.
Yeah. But it's doable. It's possible.
Absolutely. No question. No question. When they start thinking it, when you start hitting them with common sense, they're like, I'm gonna have to think about that because
Right?
something about that resonates with me. But I'm not sure what. I haven't ever heard it.
Yeah, my daughter and I were doing this checklist tonight because one of the things, she loves her business classes. And I was like, Lena, if you want to be an entrepreneur, that's fine. But maybe you don't. Maybe you just want to have a job. And that's totally okay to do too, Maybe you want to have a 9 to 5 and you have hobbies on the side. So we started looking at these different jobs. And so we did a checklist that was like, you like all these things, what's a job that you can have? And then she looked at them and I had ChatGPT kind of list what was the salary for each of those jobs. And she's like, well, I like this one, but wow, that has a really bad pay. And I was like, yes, it does. So it's something to think about. And you have to go to school for 4 years for that, for in university. And then she's like, well, this one's pretty cool and that's pretty good pay. And I said, yep. And it's only a 2-year degree. That's a trade school type of a thing. And she's like, that's for real? Really? So it's interesting that I think that one of the things that is nice for this young generation, and I think that people like us are trying to take a part in, is to shine a light. It's like shining a flashlight. Because no one did that for me when I was in university. They're like, what do you love? What are the things that you enjoy? Well, you know what? 17-year-old me, 18-year-old me liked really weird things at that time, and wasn't the greatest idea to just let me go, hey, have fun, kiddo. And here are your student loans,
Right. Right.
Not always a great idea. What other things do you think, not just teens, but when you start coaching people, what are some of the money tools that you find most powerful, most helpful?
Probably first and foremost, I think developing a personal spending plan or a budget is most critical. Most people, and when I meet with potential clients, consultations, I'll always ask the question, how are you managing your money right now? And invariably the answer is, I'm not, or I check my bank balance at the end of the month, and if I've got money left over, it was a good month, and if I don't, well, I put it on the credit card. Telling your money where to go rather than wondering where it went is a critical component to managing it, and that's something that people don't know how to, struggle with, avoid just because they think it's too hard, or they don't want to have to be put under the discipline of cutting out things in their budget or their personal spending plan, or they're going to have to talk to their spouse about it, and that's going to be an uncomfortable conversation, or whatever the case is. So the first most important component, I think, is developing a personal spending plan. It's what worked for me best in my financial life 15 years ago when I started doing that at age 48, and has given me the opportunity to have a chance at a decent retirement now, just because we started telling our money where to go. My wife and I, rather than wondering where it went, which we had spent the first 28 years of our lives just kind of spending and having a good time and seeing what happened, and realizing that at some point, that's not going to work.
And I love that you were 48 when you started out. I'm 45 and I'm getting on this path. So it's like, and I love it because I see all these people that are like, you know what? I'm 35 and it's okay. I'm doing this. I wish I'd have done this in my 20s. I'm like, oh, kid, man. I'm happy for you, but like, what about me? You know, it's like, and there's always a chance to right your ship wherever you're at. You know, you can start getting on the right path and you can start heading in the right direction. But one of the things that I am kind of addicted to planning. I love planning. I do a lot of project management, and in my main career is video production, helping people craft content and media. That's been doing that for 20 years and I love it. But you cannot succeed in a film or a video or whatever you're working on without a plan. You just can't. Like, hey, we're going to go out and make this movie. Okay, what are you going to do first? Who do you need? How many people do you need? What cameras do you need? What lenses do you need? Is it going to be raining? Is it going to be indoor? Is it going to be outdoor? What type of microphones do you need? Like, you have a whole lot of stuff to think about before you do anything. When we watch one of those big Hollywood movies, you think, oh, it's nothing big. I remember I worked with Ron Howard on the movie Angels and Demons, and it was awesome. Now, they wanted to shoot a movie that was slightly critical of the Vatican, in the Vatican, and they're not getting permission for that. They're not getting permission to shoot all this stuff in these very sacred areas for people, and for areas that are very historical. You can't rig a small explosion or something like that in that area. So it was interesting because they built the front of the Vatican, the big square, in front of the cathedral, in a Hollywood parking lot. It was out in the middle of nowhere, and there's all of these big train boxcars, and were just arranged in this big U shape, all the crates, and then they stacked and they built up this structure, and it looked so amazing. And it was just a tiny fraction of that movie. It was this tiny, it was 1 minute showing this scene, and it was this huge thing. We shot for a week there, and it was all of these people. It was about 300 extras, all these costumes, all this stuff. Now, they started planning that probably a year, maybe longer before. And it was a lot of things that then to get to that day, $1 million a day to shoot that, to film that. It's insane budgets, but yet they feel confident doing it. They feel safe doing it because they have planning. And yet people will often tend to, well, what do you want to do with your finances? Well, come a paycheck. Let's go out and have some fun, Well, where are you putting things, And for me, I'm learning this lesson, and, setting up separate bank accounts. And so my daughter was asking me, why do we need separate bank accounts for different things? Why do we have a savings account that's kind of hard to access? And I was like, now let's talk about some cookies. Imagine that you've got some cookies on daddy's desk. She's like, I'm going to eat them. And I was like, exactly. If they're easy to get to, you're going to eat those cookies, right? And she's like, well, I would try to wait. I said, I know you. You're not waiting. Both of those cookies are going to be gone in 10 minutes. We all think that we're beyond that childhood phase, but so many of us are still there. There was an NFL football player that I heard about earlier today, and he went to an electric car dealership. It was like an EV dealership on the East Coast, and he wanted to buy a Tesla Cybertruck. And he got there, and they were asking him for $200K, $100,000 over like manufactured suggested price. And he was sitting there, and he's like, "Well, you know what? Is that a good deal?" And then suddenly, he called his certified financial planner. And he said it was the person he trusts most. He called his financial planner. He said, "This is the car. This is what I want to get." And the guy's like, "Yeah, it's not in the books. You're not spending $100K over market value for a car. That's not what we do." And the guy looked up at the car dealership and he said, "No, this is the person I trust so much. He's got my back. He's watching out for me. And he said I can't buy this car." And he walked out. And I was just like, to hear that, I was just like, way to go. That's a win.
Yeah.
And it was like someone who had been informed and was making better decisions.
God, that's cool. That's a good story.
Right? Yeah, I was, because you hear about so many athletes that just, they lose all their money so fast. And here's one guy he's playing it right. Now, what about, what's another tool that you really lean on for people?
If they have debt, and in most instances, they have debt, we want to try to line out debt and create a plan from our budget that we've created in order to attack the debt. First, there's some mindset adjustments. There's some give and take, some question and answer to determine, what your goals are. And in 99.9% of the situations, debt is working against them getting towards their goals. So we have to come up with a plan as to how to attack the debt. I use a method called the debt snowball, which is listing your expenses, smallest to largest, attacking the smallest one with everything you've got, minimum payments on everything else until you eliminate that first one, and then go to the next one so that you stack up wins and feel the psychology of winning and making progress and sort of creating momentum in your financial plan and the financial way you do things, shifting your mindset away from that. So managing debt is probably the next tool after our budget that we start working on and creating so that we have a plan to put ourselves in a position to build wealth from that point forward.
Why is debt so dangerous?
Well, I think the biblical concept, if it's okay for me to say,
please do.
The borrower being slave to the lender is real. And if I use the example in my personal life. If you've never felt slave to your lender, you've never sat across from your banker while he tells you he doesn't like your business or your business plan, and you owe him 7 figures.
Yeah.
Personal example. You want to feel slave to a lender? You will feel slave to a lender in that moment. And I have felt that. And really, if it's a banker owing 7 figures or owing $500 to Academy Sports that's charging you 31% interest, it really doesn't matter. You're slave to both of them.
Yeah.
It's not serving you. If you had that money available to put towards savings, towards building wealth, the impact would be tremendous. You talked about compound interest early. Putting that money into the market or whatever savings vehicles that are comfortable for you, create opportunities that you didn't think you had. And debt's robbing you of that capacity to do that. And you really have to you have to come from a place of debt or seeing people who have gone through it to understand the ramifications of it and how detrimental it is to creating wealth.
Yeah, I was talking to my daughter about this, and this is one of the things I was talking to my wife about. I want to do whatever I can to set my daughter up so a place that she will not have to take out student loan debt. That is one of my big goals. And we have, and I'm trying to teach her a work ethic as well, because she has her own YouTube channel where we teach educational content for kids. It's something that she and I do together, but it's her job. And so she understands that she puts in work, and then mommy and daddy will give her an allowance for making these videos, that she can make something nice and help someone out. And one of the things too was like, someone was like, "Oh, were you trying to monetize that channel?" I'm like, no, you know what? That channel is simply to teach her about the value of creating something, the value of hard work. And if we put in hard work, we get more views. And if we, get anything out of it, then that's great. But really, at the end of the day, it's about building her brand and helping her, hopefully, maybe someday down the road, she'll be the smart girl, and some university might see that and go, "Hey, you're that kid with that YouTube channel. Here's a
Yeah.
scholarship. So
Right.
whatever you can do to create value.
Sure.
And one of the things that you said that really struck me, and I have another guest that's coming on in the morning that I'm in my morning, it's my evening right now, that I'm really excited to talk about as well. And like the concept that's running through both of these is freedom, financial
Hmm.
freedom. The idea of like debt literally is that lodestone, that weight that sits around your neck. And maybe you can still move, but you can't move fast. You can't move quickly. And you can't really, for me, I I haven't been able to have a legitimate vacation in a long time because taking time off from work, it hurts. It hurts my pocket. It hurts financially. And
Hmm.
and it's one of those things where my wife and I were talking and we sat down and we were like, what do we want to achieve with our financial goals? And both of us said, we want financial freedom. Like
Hmm.
that is important to us. And then so we sat down and said, now how do we get there? What is the path to create that? Because if you don't, and maybe my journey was supposed to be getting in debt and then learning about the dangers and the challenges of that so that I can teach others. And
Sure.
I have to trust a higher power that that is what
Sure.
is going on. And if that's it, then I'm going to embrace that. But at the same time, if I could go back in time and tell younger Sean not to take those student loans, you better believe I would do that.
Yeah.
I would say, hey, let's not go down that path. Can you talk to me a bit about how you got into the personal finance sphere? What was it that brought you this direction? It sounds like you have a journey of wanting to improve your own finances that kind of sparked that as well.
Well, as I mentioned, when I was in my mid to late 40s, I had very little in savings, had a massive amount of debt, and was pretty sure that I was spending more than I was making. So I sat down one day at my desk at my work and I pulled out a legal pad and I wrote down all of our last 6 months' expenses on average. And sure enough, I was spending more than we were making. And so I took that legal pad home to my wife. I sat it on the kitchen table. I slid it across the table to her and I said, "We have a problem." And after a nice diplomatic lecture on how to more effectively communicate with one spouse,
Right?
right, she said, "I'll be happy to work with you on whatever you think we need to try to fix this." And we ran across Financial Peace University. We thought maybe if we go through this together, it'll give us a plan to manage ourselves and put ourselves in a better position financially. So we went through it. And about halfway through the class, we pinky swore that that was the way we were going to do things. And not only did our finances improve, our relationship improved as well. And that was probably more important to me than anything. But we also realized that we were still had a decent amount of debt and that getting out of debt was going to be our priority for the next however long it took.
Yeah.
And 2 years ago, at age 60, 12 years later after that class, I became completely and totally debt free.
That's awesome.
And all of the anxiety and stress that I had carried to that point vanished, went away completely, poof, gone. So it was a journey that I listen to now with my clients, and I empathize and I relate because I've gone through the exact same things. That's how I've learned the value of what I'm doing and the importance of what I'm doing and how needed that it is for people out there. And if they're struggling and if they've got stress and if they've got anxiety, that there's a way out of that. And if I can help them if I can serve any role in helping them out of that, then I'm fulfilling my mission that God put me on this earth for.
I love that. I One of the reasons I started doing this podcast again, one was to help my daughter, but the other was to deal with the absolutely crippling anxiety that I dealt with financially. It was this, and there was one point in time where I was about 3 months into the podcast where I couldn't make another episode. It was, each episode caused me so much stress, and I was so lit up on where my finances were at that I didn't want to make another one. And I was just like, you know what? And then suddenly when my friend said, maybe this is what you have to do. Maybe each episode is the thing that's going to help you uncover a little bit more about what's holding you back. And maybe each episode is a puzzle piece to getting the life that you want. And not just the life I want, but to make sure that I create a situation where my daughter has the information that she needs, and that's one of the beautiful things too, is like, because for me, I'm a teacher, and I recognized early on though, that when I teach in a classroom, I can teach, maximum 5, 6, 20 students. But when I can teach on this podcast, I hopefully can reach more people and hopefully can inspire more people. You think about Dave Ramsey, like how many people has he touched? Like the lives that he's touched, the change that he's been able to create by a podcast talking about accountability, talking about simple tools. Dave Ramsey's baby steps are like like financial gospel to me. Like they are something that is so important to me that it's like, this is my chart. This is where I'm at right now. And when I hit that goal, when I saved up $1,000, I was so happy. And so you're like talking about those little wins. I was like, I did it. I've never done that before. I've never had an emergency fund. Now I've got that. Now start tackling the debt and to really start building up more of that emergency fund. It's like, it makes sense. And it's just powerful once you start going through it.
And I've got clients that are in their 50s and 60s, just as in the same situations as ones that are in their late 20s, early 30s. The ones that are late 20s, early 30s are trying to figure it out. And the ones that are in their 60s are going, I've messed around until now, and I think it's too late. Can you help me? And I said, it's never too late. Yeah. We always just start from where we are. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is right now.
100%. 100%. I love that. I love that saying. It's like everyone, and that's something that I like. I try to constantly remind myself, and I remind anybody who I'm talking to that's listening to my podcast. Some of my friends are like, Sean, and this was a big wake up for me, where I'm Gen X. My parents are, baby boomers, and I'm the tail end of Gen X, right on the cusp with millennials. And there was this thing in the newspaper where it was like, Gen X is completely unprepared for retirement as they start preparing to retire. And I was like, hold on. What are you talking about? I just entered my stride. I'm not getting ready to retire, but like part of my generation is. And, it there was this one quote that I never get quotes right, but it's like one of the biggest lies that we're told is that we have time. One of the biggest lies that all of us are told is that we have time, and we all treat it, like we have an infinite number of days on this planet, an infinite number of weeks, and we just don't go at things. And one of the things, this is something that I work with my daughter, and this is why I love about studying project management, is like, what can I do today? And really to kind of pull things back. My family, we have checklists. That is how we get stuff done. And that's how we hammer things. We keep hammering, And my daughter has been slowly and steadily improving at piano. But she's not naturally gifted at piano. She's improving because she's putting in work. And she's like, Daddy, my friends get this so fast. And I said, but you're better than them now. Well, yeah, I know. I said, why are you better at them? Because I practice. Exactly. Right thing. And she's like, oh, so practice makes you better. But it's a mindset shift. And this is something that you said earlier, like you talk when you start working with people about debt, there's a mindset shift that has to happen. Are there any other money mindset shifts that you see that a lot of people need to be making?
Oh gosh. It's an infinite world of mindset shifts that that I run across. Retirement is a huge thing for people, especially when you get in your 40s and 50s and you start looking sort of at this whatever finish line, whatever the goal that you have, and will I have enough? And then the question becomes, if I have enough, or if I feel a little bit confident that I have enough, what will give me the security and safety to not be worried the rest of my life that it is enough? Is $1 million enough to retire on? Is a general question. I don't know. What are your goals? And are you content with where you are now? Mm-hmm. Can you be content in the place that you are now? And if you can't, you need to work on that before you worry about whether you're going to gain contentment with $1 million in the bank. You have to have your feet planted firmly and you need to know where you are. And as in the scripture, godliness with contentment is great gain. Learning how to be content with where you are is probably the critical step, rather than worrying about what the future holds. And that's a mindset shift that is really, really fun to tackle, but difficult for people to get their arms around.
Yeah, it is. But the same thing, like, one of the things that I was talking to my daughter about, and when after she watched YouTube and she was watching these guys buy all this stuff, and I said, do you think that that's going to make them happy? And she was like, well, they might have fun. And I said, yeah, they might have fun. It might be fun to drive a Lamborghini, but do you think it's going to keep the happiness coming? And we sat there and thought about it. And she's like, well, and I got her to contextualize some too. She's like, well, maybe not. Maybe it does. Maybe they're a race car driver and that's important for them, And I said, okay, I like that you're thinking that way. Maybe this is important to them. Maybe that is their thing. But maybe for, what's really important is just driving. Maybe it's the act of driving that they like, and could they do it with a car that's a little bit more affordable? Well, I'm sure they could, and when you get there and you start thinking about these things about what's really important for you. For me, my family, I want to be in a place that none of us is worried financially. That we have to not sit there and look over our shoulder. My wife works in an industry that is notoriously up and down as an entertainer. Here it's great, here it's not. Second, you're all over the place. And for her, she's just like, sometimes just start crying, and she's like, I want stability. She just will break down going, I want something to be stable. And I said, well, then we need to work on secondary income streams so that you have something else that's generating revenue so that you don't have to worry about this being up and down. And she said, well, what could we do? And so we started exploring. Well, let's think about that. Let's explore what's your skill set. Let's explore what is at our disposal that we can use, But I think that you have to sit there and come back to, money doesn't buy happiness. And I love how but that's often used to justify not having money. And I don't like that as well. But money can sure as heck help you feel happier when money can buy health insurance, money can buy food, money can buy a house, and a house sure would make me happy. That's going to make me much happier. But you have to figure out what are the things, I don't need a mansion. I would love a small place that I can live with my wife and daughter and be relaxed. Right. I would love to have, a very reliable car. Give me a nice Toyota truck. I'll take that any day. Whatever it is that is, makes you happy. There was a great video I saw. And someone was like, it was on Instagram earlier today, and the guy was zooming in. He's like, oh, my car arrived. And it was like, the guy just zoomed in on the Tesla Cybertruck. And then all of a sudden he's like, my new truck, not that one, that one. And it was an old beat up truck. And he's like, I love it. Give me that any day. Because for that person, they knew what made them happy. And I think if you can know that, it helps you not fall into that trap of chasing the Joneses. And I think it's still one of the most dangerous things that can happen to anyone. And it's worse with social media.
Right. That's where the contentment comes in. And learning how to be content with where you are and what you're doing and what you have, what's important.
If you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, what financial advice would you give yourself?
Well, first, just the first thing that comes to my head is one of the first things you talked about is compound interest. If I'd have started learning how to save, how to take a percentage of my income and put it in savings and leave it alone, we wouldn't be sitting here talking on this podcast. I'd be laying on a beach somewhere,
right,
sipping my tea and enjoying whatever I was doing. Figuratively speaking, of course, but so learning the value of investing early and the value of compound interest is certainly something I'd go back in time and do. I had a meeting with my CPA, who was sort of my business advisor, in my early 40s, and I asked him, do most business people build their businesses on debt or do they bootstrap? And he said, most business people build theirs on debt. And I went, well, great. I'm going to build mine on debt because that's what most people do. And 15 to 20 years later, we went to lunch and I had been through 7 figures of debt. And I said, I'm kind of mad at you for giving me that advice. He said, what advice? And I said, you said most people build their businesses on debt. And that's what I did. And he says, well, why are you mad at me? And I said, well, that was your advice. He goes, that wasn't my advice. You asked me what most people do.
Wow.
And that's what most people did at the time. If you'd have asked me which one's a better option, I'd have certainly told you to bootstrap and operate at the speed of your own cash. And I thought, well, then that's on me. I forgot to ask the right question. I just took what you said, considered it consensus opinion and general knowledge, dove in head first. And boy, if I could go back in time, I would not borrow anything for anything. I just wouldn't, because it hasn't served me. It's created all the stress and anxiety that I've had in my life, and it's prevented me from getting where I want to go as fast as I wanted to go. But it was too late, not too late, but it was much later that I found all this out. And it's about the only regret. I don't live in the past or have regrets, but if I had that magic time machine, that's what I'd go back and change.
One of the beautiful things too that we're entering into this time of, think about before, where you would go and say how to start a business. You go to the library, find out how to start a business book, but the information was not that great. Now we are entering into a time period where there is so much great information, so easily accessible. Like I've been using ChatGPT to refine my business plan, and it is instantaneous and it reframes things in terms of that I can understand. And it's like, well, you need to do this, and then we need to do this. Let's break this down into the steps. And I think that we're entering into this period where there is the ability to gain information that would have been so hard to access before. And that's the beautiful thing right now. And I think that if, young people or anyone's watching this, it's to realize you don't have to sit there in fear or anxiety. Instead, you can start to find answers and start to gain wisdom, because there's so much wisdom to be had. There's so much information to be had. And if you can start embracing that and moving forward, sky's the limit.
Sure. But you do have to wade through conventional wisdom and popular public opinion to find common sense.
I love that.
Because common sense, as has been said, is not quite that common, not as common as we would like for it to be. So
right.
That's where if you got to give someone advice, don't say you've got all the information's all out there, because 70% of it's self-promotion and bad ideas, and you got to find that small percentage of it that's really serves you and your purposes and what you want to do in your life.
Well, this comes back as well to people like you, people that are mentors, and I think that finding a really good mentor who can, really good coach who can be part of your guiding light, who can sit there and go, and this is, someone who's walked the walk, who's been through it, and has said, you know what, learn from me. Don't do that. It's right. Like you said, like, what did everyone do? You asked your CPA, what are people doing? And he tells you what people are doing. And like you said, it was the wrong question. And I don't even think about that. But, it is so important. Are you even asking the right questions? That's right. A good place to start. And I think, and that goes back to what we were talking about with colleges and people getting student loans. Like, maybe you need to even start with, I remember there's a great new Instagram, TikTok out there. It's called Salary Transparency Street. And it's one of the things that I wish they had it when I was in college. The whole purpose of the channel is they sit there and they talk to people and they ask them on the street, what's their job and how much do they make? And when I first saw it, I was like, how dare they ask people that? But then, well, why not? Why shouldn't we know what certain careers are making? Because, maybe if we had accurate information, people would have been making more informed decisions before they got, into all that student loan debt.
Sure enough. No question.
Awesome. Let me ask you this. Where can people find you and look you up for more information, or if they want to reach out sometime?
So I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and I'm on LinkedIn. And I'm here in Longview, Texas. If anybody wanted my personal information, if you wanted to direct message me on any of those, I'd send you my cell phone number. I've got a Calendly link that we could set up a complimentary consultation if you're wanting to just talk about what your situation is and see if coaching is a fit for you or what it means and what it can potentially do. Would love to have that opportunity.